Hi there, everybody. We'll get started in a few minutes here. Welcome. See some more people filing in. Get started in a few minutes. All right. Well, that is noon by my watch, so why don't we start? I assume some people will trickle in a bit as we are getting rolling here. My name is Dr. Patrick McConnell. I'm facilitating this webinar today, and with me supporting is my training coordinator, Anna Gangsis. Anna, anything you need to say before we really dive in?
No, nothing that I need to say. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks. So let's go ahead and get started a little bit with the boring stuff. Let me start with some introductions. So this is me. There is way too much stuff on this slide, but I put it all in one place so that we can forget it quicker because it's the least important thing that we'll talk about today. I've been an Agilist for well over a decade at this point. I started off my Agile journey as a product owner on small teams building mapping applications, primarily for government agencies here in the Washington, D.C. region where I live. I did that for a while, and then I stepped into the role of Scrum Master on teams for a bit, and then I became a full-time Agile coach for a bunch of years, ultimately becoming the director of Agile practices for one of the gigantic government-focused system integrators here in town. That whole time I was also pursuing becoming a certified Scrum Trainer, and I finally accomplished that a few years ago, and now I mostly just get to do things like this all the time, teach classes in Agile stuff, mostly Scrum, and make grown-ups play silly games, and that is fun. So I am used to doing Agile, whatever that word means, or phrase means, in very large organizations. I'm used to a lot of bureaucracy. I'm used to leading in positions where I don't necessarily have formal authority over the people I'm leading, for example, and that actually works out really well in terms of some of the ways that we need to think about leadership in the Agile context. A few other things about me. That's my Twitter you see on the slide, @bowtieagility. If you give that a follow, it's just me doing Agile stuff. You won't see me yelling at Panera about a sandwich or something. It's just Agile stuff on that particular Twitter account, @bowtieagility. And if you do post anything about me or us on any of the socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, we'd love it if you tagged us hashtag NextUp Solutions so that we can see it. That would be great. So that's me. Let's see here. In terms of who we are, I assume you know us a bit already because you've been getting our emails to show up to these webinars. So that's cool. But in case you don't, we're NextUp Solutions. We are an Agile certified training and coaching and consulting practice here in the Washington, D.C. area. We are also Acceleration, our sister practice, which is a technology externship program where we hire college kids in their later years of their undergrad, put them to work part-time doing real software development and testing for real companies. Companies get great service at fantastic rates. The students get an amazing education in the actual work of software development, and then they go off to amazing careers after they graduate. And that is the #3 ranked technology internship in the entire country in a list that includes all of the giant players you would expect too. So that's us. NextUp Solutions and Acceleration. In terms of what we do at NextUp, here's kind of a sample of our certified Agile training. Lots and lots of certified Scrum Alliance courses. Also, we do Kanban University, Scaled Agile, DevOps Institute, and some IC Agile courses focused on testing as well. So all sorts of certified Agile training in various flavors and stripes. We do that. We also are a full service Agile coaching and consulting shop. So we do enterprise transformation, dealing with scaling. We have this kind of accidental specialty in the public sector as well. So Agile and government, we're very good at, a lot of experience with. We, of course, do all of the team type consulting you would expect for Agile coaching. So helping new teams start up, helping existing teams understand what's working for them and not with assessments, embedded team coaching, and that's also technical mentoring. And then we also specialize in leadership coaching and development. So both for cohorts and individuals, often starting with a leadership circle 360 assessment, all that kind of thing. So that's us. That's what we do. Now, let's go ahead and dive in a little bit into what we're actually here for. Can I get a sense, just out of curiosity, geographically, where are folks? If you want to type in the chat there, I'm in the DC region, and if you are too, go ahead and put that there. Where else? You can go ahead and just put time zones or general localities where you happen to be videoing in from this fine afternoon. All right, seeing lots of DC, great. Lots of DC, Chicago, great. London, wow. Well, good evening. Let's see here, DC. Yes, good evening, sure, I should say. I believe you're either 6 or 7 hours ahead of us. I forget how the daylight savings math works across the Atlantic. Good. All right, cool. So a lot of folks based where I am, and you may have some of the same experiences I've had with Agile and public sector, but then also folks all over the place. Well done, cool. Welcome everybody, nice to see you. And for those of you that have your cameras on, that's especially nice because I like to be able to see faces, see whether or not my jokes are landing, all that kind of thing. All right, well done. So what we're going to talk about up front is quickly, what is Agile leadership in a nutshell, or maybe more saliently, how is Agile leadership different than traditional leadership in waterfall contexts and things like that? Why does it end up often needing to be based in an entirely different tool set? So let's start with thinking about management trends. And I know there's a whole lot of stuff in this chart, but we really think about the development of established kind of quote unquote scientific management theories going all the way back to really the 1910s, when you think of Taylorism and the birth of that. There have been a whole lot of trends over the years. We're really going to focus just kind of on these. We have the birth of Taylorism, and then kind of its most recent formalization with things like the PMBOK guide, the Project Management Book of Knowledge, and that particular flavor of understanding about what waterfall tends to mean. And then we have theory Y as a juxtaposition to theory X that pops up a little earlier, of which Agile development, I think, is really kind of a natural extension. So we're going to look at kind of just those two big trends, Taylorism and PMBOK style waterfall practices versus theory Y and Z and agile development practices. Let's start with Taylorism. This really began with Taylor taking a look at a Midvale Steel Company in Philadelphia. And when you think about value stream mapping, when you think about lean, a lot of that thinking really comes from Taylorism all the way back in 1882. So lean before anybody thought about lean, where it was really whatever you're trying to build or do as a repeated process, what you need to do is map it all out, get out your stopwatches, construct these timetables, and then discover how can we maximize the efficiency of every single step in this flow, cutting out pieces that we don't necessarily need because they aren't adding value, and making the steps that we do want to keep as short as possible. Now, the overall kind of nuts to bolts thinking about people when it comes to managing them in pure Taylorism is really that human beings are just more expensive machines. They're more adaptable, they're retrainable, all that kind of thing, easier to repurpose than a machine. But their role in a value stream is really the same as any other cog or machine part. So we need them to be replaceable. We need to have all of their work be absolutely understood. What does managing people in this kind of context mean? If we think of people as machine parts, what does management really mean in this sense? Any ideas?
Maintenance, ensuring that there's maintenance and parts are working properly.
Yes. So for example, we might want our people to get flu shots, not because we don't, not because we necessarily care that much about whether they get sick, but because if they're absent from work, that costs us time and money. So yes, we think about them from a maintenance point, for the value of the value stream, let's say, the value of the enterprise, not so much the value of the people. So yes, that's very good. Other ideas? Thank you. What does being a good manager in this kind of people are parts sense mean? Apart from maintenance, which is absolutely there. All right, well, it could be a whole bunch of things. For me, most of them probably we could roll up under the term compliance. Being good at management often is directing the people who have been given to you to control to make sure they're doing exactly what they are supposed to do. So whatever the pre-existing plan is, making sure that people spell that out, that they do exactly those things, that they don't add steps, that they don't skip steps, that really being great at management is making sure that you're getting the maximum efficiency of these mapped out pre-existing well-understood processes executed. That's typically what being great at management is in the sense of pure Taylorism. And that gets embraced pretty radically in a whole lot of places, ultimately becoming, for example, assembly line thinking and all that kind of thing. Later, starting really in the 60s, people started contrasting these kind of patterns, scientific kind of management, Taylorism, thinking about workers, as theory X. And then as a counterpoint, maybe we want theory Y. So those are kind of these two artificial terms that people started using in the 60s. Theory X, the kind of assumptions about workers in theory X is that workers are by default lazy. We always have to be yelling at them to do what they're supposed to do. They don't want to take on responsibilities, so we always have to be monitoring them to make sure that they're living up to the agreements of the contract that we sign them to. They come to the work ignorant, meaning we have to teach them all aspects of the job. And their motivations are typically purely external, meaning if we dangle carrots in front of them, we will get more work out of them, all that kind of thing. So to be good at management in this theory X context of pure Taylorism is continuously monitoring everybody in 5-minute increments, continuously directing everybody in 5-minute increments. And then all the expertise for that job has to be centralized and focused on that management role. They have to be the most specialized, the most knowledgeable person about all of the work under them. And then in terms of the way people are evaluated and grown, it's typically on this individualistic performance rating basis. Who is the fastest worker under me? Who is the most efficient worker under me? Things like that, but not so much teams. Theory Y conceptions are more that we assume that workers are doers by default, that they want responsibility, that they do show up with knowledge. In fact, that's why we hired them. That's why we pay for people with very expensive backgrounds and trainings and things like that. And rather than carrot and stick forms of motivation, in theory Y, it's more the assumption that people are motivated through things like mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So, for example, if you take a look at Drive, Daniel Pink's book on that subject, which is a good pop psychology summary of the work on that to date. So being good at managing people in the theory Y context is not telling people what to do in 5-minute increments. It's continually providing clarity of vision. Where are we trying to get to and why? And then once our people understand that vision, it's continually getting things out of their way of delivering that vision. So that means continuous enablement. That means we assume that the expertise in the work is distributed throughout my organization, that everyone who works for me has important and key knowledge about the work that's happening and that we want to preserve and maintain and maybe share around the organization. Because people are more often likely to be part of teams in theory Y, that also means we need different and sometimes more democratic forms of evaluation, because it's hard to evaluate and reward people as individualists and also expect them to be collaborators on their job. We often have to rework that. So those are kind of the big contrasts between theory X, Taylorism style people management, versus theory Y, people management. And then a little while later, we have theory Z coming out of the 80s and 90s, which is really kind of an extension of theory Y. It kind of starts with the theory Y assumptions and then adds with it that the real goals of management are to promote generalism across the enterprise, so that we don't have skills, specialties siloed inside of individual people or individual teams. And then good leadership is promoting general employee welfare, making sure that our people are well taken care of as an end in and of itself, not just because that might cost me time or money later. Theory Z also includes officially thinking about learning as having equal place in a value stream to end outcome value. So learning and dollars are both more or less equally valued to us, and then establishing mutual trust. And it's really in that kind of theory Z extension of theory Y thinking that we get to Agile approaches. So if we think about PMBOK style resource management, which is in many ways kind of a really core formalization of the Taylorism concepts that have been in practice since late 1800s, early 1910s. We have this group PMIs getting stood up really in 69, and then first finally publishing this PMBOK, this Project Management Book of Knowledge, in 1996. So not all that long ago. When it comes to how we're supposed to manage people according to PMBOK, the core assumptions are we can do centralized resource planning and allocation, meaning we can map out across our organization all of the skill sets and abilities and knowledges we have. And then we can just assign people with those skills to work as it comes up, because we can know what the work is, which means it's easy for us to exist in these very matrixed, often kind of outsourced methods of organization. We think of our workers, therefore, as specialists. So we're there to, they're there to apply a certain set of skills for a certain set of time and then move on. And we create and then explode teams based on combining these cogs together as one little engine for a certain amount of time. And then when a skill is no longer needed, we replace that cog with a new one. So being good at management in this kind of PMBOK waterfall resource management style is all about skill allocation. It's all about continually refining and maintaining, RACI charts on the wall so that everyone knows exactly their particular roles and responsibilities versus their accountabilities, all those kind of things. So we're always having the conversations about is that behavior in your swim lane or mine? Is that my job or your job? Resource management is also continually planning, monitoring, plan your monitoring and control mechanisms. And there is some notion of the value of what sometimes is called soft skills or people skills or core skills in resource management in PMBOK, but that's mostly just as kind of an add-on to make sure that you're enough of a people person that you can talk to groups. That's pretty much where they stop. So in Agile teams, we have issues with some of these things, and you could sum up a lot of them for a start with the word resources. You know, a general concern in the Agile community is that people are not actually resources. Resources is stuff and money. People are people, resources are printers. So we don't even want to consider our people resources, because that to me means machine parts, not human beings. So when we think about what we need to make an Agile framework, like say Scrum or extreme programming or Kanban really work, these are humanistic, team-based methods that assume often figuring work out as we go. That means our assumptions about leadership have to do with continually clarifying vision based on feedback and making it easier to continually get that feedback all the time. That's what we really need, not so much these rigorous kind of project, schedule, Gantt chart based control methods and visualization methods. We need tangible outcome-based feedback, and we need to get it as often as possible. We assume that products will be built by smaller cross-functional teams that are going to work and plan and execute collectively. That means the people in the teams are probably T-shaped. They have one or two really deep skill set areas, but really a bunch of really wide, broadly applicable skills. And then we need the freedom in our teams to continually experiment, to adapt and improve themselves, improve the product direction. Figuring out how to be a team takes work. That's a little bit of overhead up front. So we also want to preserve teams as much as possible. Once a team has gone through the hard work of becoming a great Agile team, whatever their particular framework, Scrum or what have you, it's unfortunate to then explode that team if a project ends and then have to reform a new team out of some of the same people later with new teammates. Instead, once they've gotten to a high-performing state, let's keep them together so they can keep being high-performing. But that means we need different ways of managing and assigning work around an organization. That might require re-engineering some very fundamental structures of the way the organization is set up. So those are the assumptions about how work will be done in the Agile context. To be good at management in the Agile context means continually providing and refining clarity around program and product direction. It means service to teams rather than command and control of teams. It means continually advocating for their best interests as a collective and as individuals. And that means fundamentally having a very humanistic understanding that people are people and not cogs. So that's a whole lot of words on really the differences between how we get to different ideas and skill sets about what management means in more traditional, waterfall assuming, scientific management-based resource allocation thinking about management versus the skills that we might need to be good at managing actually Agile teams. So one kind of, if we round up all of these kind of comparisons, leading in the waterfall context is primarily about accumulating and then exercising power within the organization. So it's about command and control, whereas in the Agile context, it's more about influence. Instead of telling people what to do, it's figuring out with them what is the best thing to do and helping to influence them based on recommendations and experience and knowledge. So we go from command and control on the power side to servant leadership on the influence side. We go from a compliance focus to an end value focus. I just want the best outcomes I can for my team. It's less important to me how they got there if they're delivering outcomes, which could mean they get there in a bunch of different ways. But if we keep our focus on the outcomes, it doesn't matter to me so much. In the waterfall structure, choices tend to be mostly globalized. We aggregate choice making all the way up to the highest, most enterprisey level. Versus in Agile contexts, we assume that choices will be mostly localized. We can do these kind of very rigorously managed stopwatch based process management in the waterfall context, because it's all defined processes. It's things we can understand up front before we do them and then meter them along the way. In Agile frameworks, often we're adopting those models because we assume the work needs to be rooted in empiricism, meaning it's going to take experimentation as we go to figure out what it is we need to do, because we're always doing things for the first time, building new products, delivering them in new environments, that kind of thing. So when we think about, how do we optimize our interactions? In the waterfall power-based sense, it's all about contractual relationships and things like service level agreements, thou shalts. In the influence context, it's more about setting up the structures for efficient collaboration that can be fuzzier. And then when it comes to how organizations actually get set up, we end up with often very rigorous, rigid hierarchy and silo-based structures on the power side, in comparison to typically much flatter, more federated models on the Agile framework side, meaning I have a bunch of teams that can all deliver value more or less independently. And maybe they can maybe they need to collaborate sometimes, but the more independent they are, typically the more business agility we get out of the overall end-to-end structure. So to be good at these things, we might need very different skills. Any questions so far about why we end up in different places for what kind of skills we might need in these two contexts? Legacy waterfall versus Agile. Is there a question? All right. I do hear a bunch of background noise, but I do not hear a question. So I'm gonna... All right. So there we go. Sorry about that. So let's move on and let's take a look at what kind of skills we might need to be good at this context. And let's think about where great Agile leaders come from. So to do that, first of all, let's think about the skills they might need. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to post a link in the chat. Let's see here. Oh, there's a question in the chat. How do Agile mindset helps in leadership power shift? That's a great question. And I think actually we'll get into that throughout this next exercise and taking a look at where some of these things come from. So I'm going to save that particular question to the end until we've had this next conversation. But thank you for that, Manoj. All right, so in the chat, I'm posting a link to a Miro board. And if you click that link, you should be able to get straight into this board as an anonymous contributor. For those of you who have used Miro before, this is probably going to be pretty easy for you. For those of you who have not, when you get into the board, there's a toolbar on the left-hand side. And what you're going to do in a minute is you're going to use the sticky note tool to create sticky notes here with what kinds of knowledge, what kinds of awareness, and what kinds of mindset do you think an Agile leader might need to be good at leading Agile teams of whatever flavor, whether it's Scrum or something else. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you up into teams kind of randomly here. And what I want you to do is in your breakout rooms, as a group, come up with stickies for each of these columns. What types of knowledge, what kinds of things should an Agile leader know about to be good at being an Agile leader? What kinds of awarenesses, what kinds of things does an Agile leader need to continually be in the loop on to be good at leading Agile teams? And then how should an Agile leader think? What kinds of mindsets should they embody to be good at being an Agile leader? You don't have to knock yourself out here. If your team comes up with anywhere from 5 or 10 stickies spread across these 3 columns, we'll probably be in good shape. Okay, so I'm going to send you into your breakout teams, create your stickies as a group. Here we go, and we'll just do this for 5 minutes. We've got 23 people. I'm going to create 4 rooms. There we go, automatically. 5 minutes. Begin.
How are you doing today, Pat?
All right, how are you?
I am good. Oh, before I forget, there was a student that was wondering if they could get the slide deck as well as the recording of the webinar at the end of once we send out the recording and whatnot. Hunter said that it should be easy for her to add into the email. Do you have a PDF version of the slide deck that you could send me?
Yeah, I can generate one pretty quickly.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I'll be right back.
Mhm. Hi, Emily. Oh. Seems like they're still working. Just waiting for everybody's audio to catch up with us. All right, I think we got everybody back, just about. By the way, if you are done editing a sticky, if you click off of it in Miro so that I can move it around, that would be great. Whoever's clicked on the subject matter expert, you click off of that somewhere so that I can move it. All right. So let's take a look at what we've got here, starting with knowledge, if you're back looking at my screen. And again, whoever is this particular guest, if you can click off of the subject matter expert sticky so that I can move it. Just click anywhere else in space on the board, that'd be great. All right, well, we'll just have to deal. So basic knowledge of all Agile processes. Sure, fundamentals of the Agile process. We'll put that one on top there. Would a leader have to know about every Agile process? Every Agile method?
No.
No.
Not necessarily. Probably at least the ones that are used by the teams that they're supporting. And they don't necessarily, so for example, if you're leading Scrum teams, you don't necessarily have to be a Scrum expert, but you should understand how Scrum works. And if you've got Scrum teams and Kanban teams, you should probably know the basics of both of those. Profile of team members. I'm actually going to move that one over here to awareness because that might change over time. Timelines, maybe. Yep, I'll put that one right there. General. Well, that's not very specific. What kinds of stuff falls under general? All right, well, I'm going to put this one down here then. So yes, there's all sorts of knowledge that might be useful. Knowledge of team skills, I'm going to put that one over here as well. All right, so yes, and I'm stacking these things on purpose just because they're speaking kind of a theme. So these are both pretty similar. I'm going to stack those there. So yes, I think we have some of the core knowledges here. How about awareness? Let's take a look at awareness. Life stage of members, sure. Profile of team members. Aware of impediments. Yep, I'll put that one up here. People skills. Yes, having that kind of stuff. Good. Values and principles. Whose values and principles? That we should be aware of. The organizations, the leaders, the teams, those relating to a particular Agile framework. Any more specificity with this one? All right, something in chat here. Product. All right, yes. I'm actually going to put that one over here. All right, actually I'm going to put it there for a reason. Okay. Let's see here, resources available. Okay. As long as we're talking about resources again as stuff and money, not so much resources in reference to people. All right, I think we've touched on a couple of the major themes of awareness, and then let's look at mindset here. Empowering, yes, I like that. I'm going to put that one down here. Agile mindset, yes, I'll put that one down here too. Recognizing team successes, sure. Empathy, yep, I'm going to put that one up here too. Agile and mentoring, yes, all right. So a couple of the major themes as well. So yes, what I would do here is, first of all, unlock these things. Let me bring this to front. So you might, for example, lump these things kind of in these buckets. These are areas that are absolutely critical for a leader to have if they're going to be good at leading Agile teams. There could be other things that are just great ideas for them, but not necessarily required. So general knowledge about, say, what are we doing here, whatever might be good, not necessarily required compared to some of these more critical, more specific things. So yes, I didn't have to punt a bunch of things down to the bottom area. The way I typically would sum these things up would be like this. So let me bring this to front now. There we go. And we can ungroup these things. So let's start with knowledges. we could really lump together the critical knowledge that an Agile leader needs, maybe into 3 buckets, starting with knowledge about specific Agile methods. So we covered that one, very good. Next up, knowledge about the particular value stream that my teams are engaged in to deliver whatever the outcome is. And the value stream would be everything that has to happen between an idea and some touchable business objective or mission objective that we're trying to deliver. All of the steps and actions that have to occur across the organization. So understanding, for example, not just what does my team do, but how does the work of my team mesh with all of the other teams, and how does that eventually lead to something that we could call value? So understanding how this particular organization works, fundamental for an Agile leader. Then finally, how do those value streams play into this particular organization's vision, and how can we grow with the organization over time? So those are knowledges I think that are critical to being good at being an Agile leader. In terms of awareness, we touched on a few of these. I would bucket these things like this. First of all, situational awareness. What's going on around this team right now? So context, consequence, those kind of things. What are we trying to do right now? What could happen to us if we don't pick the right choice? What's likely to happen in the future? All those kind of things. All those situational awareness details. Also key would be the social awareness details. So who are the people on my teams? How do they interact with each other? Being good at talking to people, being fantastic at listening, understanding the team dynamics that pop up inside of a team and how we might coach and influence those interactions to encourage growth and trust and all those kind of things. So situational awareness is important, as distinct from social awareness, also very important. Now, the one we did not touch on that's also very important for an Agile leader would be this one, self-awareness. Who am I in reference to this group of people? How am I seen? How does my presence impact their interactions? And having some tools to be good at self-awareness, I think, is absolutely critical for a good Agile leader. And maybe one of the hardest things to get. Where does self-awareness come from? We'll take a look at that in a minute. Finally, mindset. I think we probably touched on all of these. First of all, creating an environment that's based on sincerity and truth, kind of the honest intention of interaction, all those kind of things. So people believe us when we talk. We believe them when they talk, and that people feel like that these interactions are coming from a place of genuine concern for the well-being of the team and for the well-being of the organization. So sincerity. Next up, trust building. We talked a lot about this one as well. I think your sticky notes touch on this as well. So being an organization, for example, where we trust teams to do the right thing, that we think of leadership as both clarity of vision and service, and we can trust them to carry out the work. We can let them own questions of how work gets done, for example. And then finally, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to the self. One of the things that I've seen is, I think that's a great point on the leadership, but I think also like how their actions influence the group, and being aware that sometimes they'll be saying something and they think that it's all great, but in reality, their actions contradict what they're saying. So really thinking about it that from that perspective. Yeah. And the same thing with that relates then to what you were just saying about trust building, that yeah, it's going to create trust, but really if there's not that sincerity and don't do as I do as I say, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a great point. One of my favorite examples that I give all of the time in my class is, for example, the difference between a leader who is available versus a leader who is approachable. So, maybe you've had a boss at some point in your career say something to you like, well, you all know my door is always open. But it's very clear from the way they say it that we're never supposed to walk through the door. That's being technically available, right? Like, they might as well say like, HR informs me that my door is always open, right? It's like, look how technically compliant I am with this policy, but not bought into it. So that's what we mean. That's someone who is going through the motions maybe, but they are not being sincere And even if, even worse, if they lack the self-awareness to where they think they're being sincere, but everyone can tell they're not, right? So yes. So these things, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also the trust building, I think one of the things that at least I've experienced as, not as a leader, but from our leadership is, really losing trust in our leadership when they don't have your back. When you have, as a team, you work on something, but somebody higher up disagrees with that, and your leader, who's supposed to have your back and say, no, I gave them this responsibility, they worked on it. And then it comes to the point where it's like, well, they did it this way, I don't know why. And then you're sort of thrown under the bus.
Yeah, which is not at all fun, right? And then, you see that a lot, for example, with Agile transitions, where someone like me shows up to teach people Scrum, let's say, and everyone's actually kind of like bummed to see me, which is weird because my classes are fun. And then you find out it's because, well, this is their latest gigantic management transition, right? And no one, everyone has seen the last 8 of them be not supported. So why should we believe that this one is going to be supported too? Right. So yes, you see that over and over, unfortunately, sometimes. But yeah, thank you for those points. That's great. So here's the problem. If these things that we just talked about are, from my point of view and experience, the key sorts of knowledge and awarenesses to maintain and mindsets to embody to be good at leading Agile teams, where do those things come from? How do people get into roles today? And hang on, Rami, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, so I have a question about that, being an Agile team and adapting a Scrum process. So for product owners, does their supervisor need to at least know what they do and understand it, or they don't have to?
Yes, I would say so. It doesn't necessarily mean that, whoever the product owner rolls up to has to also be a certified Scrum product owner or, certified Agile anything maybe, but they should maybe understand, for example, the fundamentals of Scrum if we're going to let someone be a product owner, and why we need the product owner to have certain types of authority on a team in order to get typically good value out of them in the product owner role. Where we don't have that understanding, it often creates a huge amount of impediments for product owners to just be able to do their job.
So that actually was the reason for my question. Is if there is no trust and there is no authority, we're not really working in an Agile environment. Is that correct?
Often, yes. Right. So if we still, if we're giving lip service to doing something like Scrum, but at the end of the day, everybody is still being managed in 5-minute increments in a command and control, risk-averse, fear-based structure, we are probably not embodying any Agile method, whether it's Scrum or whatever.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So my next question would then be, and we can just talk about this as a room, typically, where do leaders come from in your organizations? How do people get either hired into or promoted into a leadership position, typically? Is it because they have the skills to be great at leading Agile teams? Or was it because they were good at a job that's part of an Agile team and now we're going to make them the boss of people who do that, or whatever else? What kinds of things have you seen? Anybody want to volunteer anything? Connections, someone says. Yes, unfortunately. Could just be who we know. Right. So yes, it could be. Often what we see is people are promoted into positions of leadership over Agile teams, often without necessarily any of these skills. No one has really done a check. We haven't really had a method to tell, are they great at these things? In fact, most unfortunately, sometimes people are promoted really on to a kind of thing that we call the Peter principle sometime, and I'm not actually sure where that phrase comes from, but it's the notion that people get promoted just beyond their level of competence. So, you used to be really good at doing the work, so now we're going to give you a bunch of people who do that to lead. That doesn't mean they're good at leading people. It just might mean that they were really good at doing the work. And that happens, unfortunately, a lot to Scrum teams. So you get people promoted based on really good at managing multi-year project schedules in a waterfall fashion that are now overseeing 5-6 Scrum teams, let's say, who are building in this empirical sprint to sprint, rapidly evolving vision kind of context. Those are not the same skills. And that creates problems for us, because when we have people in these positions that are trained to do defined process control, that are trained to do waterfall, and then placed into empirical situations like leading Scrum teams, what happens? What do we see? And we've had some comments already in the class that get at some of the consequences. What other outcomes do we see?
I mean, in my experience, it's always been just one big giant mush mess.
Yeah.
Where you're not really doing Scrum, you're not really doing Agile,
Yeah.
you're not really doing
Yeah.
waterfall. It's just
Yeah.
kind of
We end up
bits
in like
and
this.
pieces mixed in, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah,
we end up in
I
this, like,
agree.
Scrumafall situation, right? So, you know, one really frequent illustration of that is sometimes when I'm teaching people Scrum, someone will tell me, I know all about Scrum and I don't like it because there's too many meetings. And I'll say, well, what do you mean? Like, most people on a Scrum team only go to one meeting every day and it's only 15 minutes long. There shouldn't be any other meetings. No. I mean, we've got to go to sprint planning plus the daily Scrums and reviewing the retro, but we also have to do all of our project status meetings and then the program management meeting and then the blah, blah, blah meeting and the whatever else, without realizing that we were supposed to stop all those other things when we started doing Scrum, because we don't need them anymore. Those are all like status behaviors that are kind of legacy accruals in the organization based on past failures. But we have, you know, radical transparency in Scrum such that we don't necessarily need all these status meetings. Unfortunately, when you meet someone who's never been allowed to stop going to status meetings, it's natural for them to hate Scrum because now there's more meetings for them to go to. So that's kind of a classic example. You know, if you think about organizations where people spend significant chunks of their week sitting around some form of table, whether it's real or virtual, explaining to one person what they did today or what they're going to do this week or something over and over for hours at a time, that's probably not doing Scrum. That's probably a lot of legacy waterfall behaviors crammed in. And that's just one of the kind of symptoms.
Can I just quickly interrupt and
Yes.
and say that you just stated the story of my life?
I'm very sorry, but that is also a very common thing. It's the thing I've seen a whole lot.
I think the other side of this is also that if you are trying to move from this waterfall mentality into an Agile, it doesn't matter the training, it doesn't matter. It just takes a lot of reinforcement despite everybody's best intentions. You
Really
just
does.
can't make the change.
Yeah. So actually that you know, very nicely tees me up for kind of the closeout here, which is quickly, let's just take a look at where could someone who's maybe going to be an Agile leader get these things. And we might bucket the sources of these abilities into kind of 4 groups. They could be innate. Some people might just have that knowledge or skill or ability, you know, more or less from birth or from the way they were raised. We could train people for them sometimes. And, you know, maybe explaining it is enough in some cases. In other cases, we might be able to get there through experience. So, you know, through their own kind of lived reinforced experience over time. And then finally, we can also coach some of these behaviors as well, which means giving somebody guided, directed advice that is rooted in the context they're working in and bridging to external experience and best practices and things like that. So for each of these, you know, we might not be able to get at them with all 4 of these methods. So let's take a look at that. Let's start with the leadership kind of core knowledges. Let's start with Agile methods. Can someone know a lot about Agile methods innately? Like, are people just born knowing Scrum or Kanban?
No.
No, probably not. In fact, that's probably true also of these, right? No one is born understanding how a particular organization works internally, or necessarily how, you know, that organization really functions in the wider market, things like that. You can certainly train all of these things. People could also learn these things on the job throughout their careers, and they can definitely be coached in them. So for the knowledges, these are things that are kind of learning gained throughout time, either through formalized training, personal experience, or hands-on kind of mentorship, whether it's in a cohort, in a coaching sense, or individualized coaching. What about the awareness that we need? Let's start with situational awareness. Can we get to that innately?
Not all the time. No.
Well, I think it depends. I mean,
I would say
depends
probably
on where you grew up.
for situational awareness. Like if you hire into a company and day one, they say, this is your team. You aren't going to walk in knowing what that team is doing, what the context is around them. So it's hard to be innate with that one. You could get some training, but even the training, you know, if you think about anytime you've been given an orientation slide deck for a new role you've been given, it's not like you really typically leave that training understanding, oh, this is what my job is now. It's more like, okay, I took some notes and I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to figure that stuff out on the job. So situational awareness, for me, I find is more often we can try to train it, but it more comes from experience and coaching. And the training, if we do it, has to be backed up through experience and maybe coaching as well. Social awareness, that I think people can get innately. There are some people, so for example, I've always been kind of a very extroverted, soft skills, good communicator type person. I pay attention to nonverbal behaviors, all that kind of thing. No one officially trained me to do that. Other people don't have that innately. They might be able to get to it through practice. So when it comes to training, for example, I could tell somebody what to look for, but they're only going to get good at it through practice and maybe through coaching, especially both, if we can do both.
I have a question on situational awareness, because I'm kind of struggling with that. I think there are some certain people that grow up in certain backgrounds that actually are quite situational aware, given the places where they grew up. I'm throwing this out there, issues with race, issue with some of the things that we're seeing, that you are actually, by the nature of your upbringing, you are more situationally aware.
Yeah. What I would say
I don't
is,
know what I asked.
I think we're agreeing about whether or not people can come by that, the skills to know that innately. But for me, the way I'm thinking of situational awareness is it's specific to a particular situation.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I may, by virtue of my background, have a whole lot of instincts about what to look for when I get into a situation. I don't walk in knowing the situation.
Gotcha. I get it now. Thank you.
Okay.
That's helpful.
So what you're talking about is more like social awareness, understanding what to pay attention to, for example. And often people who are really good at social awareness have an easier time picking up situational details, but they still have to get that kind of by being part of the experience typically. For self-awareness, again, some people are just good at this, I think, by the nature of their upbringings, or maybe kind of innate behaviors. Whether or not we can train people to do it, and whether or not they can maybe get to it through their own self-directed experience, I think is a question mark. Some people can, I think, some people can't. They might get there easier with direct coaching. But I think of these, self-awareness is really the hardest and definitely has to be backed up by support typically. Last one, let's take a look at mindset, sincerity. We've got a couple comments here. Some people are naturally good, others can't even with training. Yes, I would agree with that. There are some people who are just kind of, it seems like perpetually oblivious to their own behaviors, no matter how often we point out the consequences. Now, I don't think anybody is hopeless, but I think for some people, it is a harder challenge than others. Last one, let's take a look at mindset. Sincerity. I think people can innately have any of these, and we can certainly coach for any of these. Sincerity of interaction. Some people are just, I think, naturally good at establishing trust and rapport with people. And then also there are some people who just come to an environment with a growth mindset already. Their objective is not to, be the best person or be the boss. Their job is to help everybody around me be better all the time. And that's really what we want in terms of growth mindset. And then certainly we can also coach people to be better at these things as well. Whether we can get there through direct training, I don't think I can train people to be sincere beyond acting lessons. And even then they're not really being sincere. Maybe they can get there through experience if it's backed up by coaching. With these others, I think we can certainly show people behaviors that help us grow an environment of trust. They might discover them on their own as well. We could support both of those certainly with coaching. And the same would be true of the growth mindset. So the real goal here is that some of these, kind of the real takeaway is that some of these things are things that people just have. If they don't just have them, sometimes we can teach them. Sometimes we can help them grow into the role, and sometimes they might discover it on their own. What would be useful in any environment is if we're going to put people in front of Agile teams as the leader of those teams, one way or the other, whatever that means in your environment, it would be good if they had some support growing into those roles. Formalized Agile leadership training as a start, access to coaching from colleagues, and then maybe from mentors and particularly outside experts as well. And that's really the takeaway here of the webinar. So thanks very much for attending, and thanks for your active inputs. I very much appreciate it. This is my contact info. We will send these things out again. Again, my Twitter is Bowtie Agility. I'm always happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I have a pretty large network. If you want to talk about any of this stuff too, we'll also send out a link for you to talk about developing Agile leadership, maybe if in your environments. And you can just directly book a short conversation with me using the link there that you see on the screen. We'll provide that in a follow-up email as well through HubSpot. So feel free to give me a follow at my Twitter or on LinkedIn. You can also follow NextUp on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We post all sorts of fun things, including more webinars like this. And that is it for my talk. I will hang out here in the chat in case anybody has any other questions on their way out. And hopefully I've answered the questions you had, and I look forward to interacting with you more in the future. So
Thank you, Dr. McConnell.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been great, and it's like a bright perspective on how to see things, and how to help people also.
Great.
Because yeah, in a work environment, you have all sorts of people, and some of them are really good at what they do, but then these leadership and personal skills, which they may have or they may not, we don't know until we get the tool set that you just highlighted, and maybe we can, I don't know, have a better work relationship.
Yes, absolutely.
Because from being on the workforce for too long, most people are very nice when they're outside of work, but then when they come to the work environment, it's like a whole different person.
Well, that can happen. Often I think that's a symptom of kind of larger, more systemic issues going on around them too. But yes, that can certainly happen.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it,
so much.
and hope to see you in future webinars.
Great. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, Pat, I am going to hop off. I have another meeting here, but if you could send me the PDF whenever you get the chance of the slides, and then I'll pass that along to Hunter to send out to everyone.
No problem. Thanks,
you.
Hunter. All right. Don't hear any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks for coming, everybody.